Hi, I'm Sean Waterman and you're watching Cyberscoop TV. Today I'm joined by Lee Rossi of SimSpace and Jason Strawderman of Tegile. Thanks very much for coming along, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
So I want to start with you, Lee. You work with public and private sector CISOs and CIOs every day. What are some of the challenges and gaps that they're facing in the area of preparedness?
For cybersecurity, yeah, fair question. So I think there's a number of challenges. So I think at this point, organizations have spent a lot of time and recognized the magnitude of the problem in terms of cybersecurity, recognize that they need to do something about it, and probably have gone out and spent a decent amount of money on tools, technologies, and people. Now the question is, how do they take a lot of the investment? How do they understand how to actually bring in the right people to be able to manage what's going on and understand how to actually deal with the threat? So spent a lot of money, purchased a lot of things. Now the question is, how do you make sure that the people are effectively trained and actually know how to actually deal with some of the attacks that are going through within it? So that's one example of a challenge.
And I mean, is that the most, so you talked about people, technology, processes. You said people's is the key, is it?
It's one of the keys. Okay. So I think what they've done over the years is spent a lot of money on a number of products. And you talk to some of these very large organizations and you ask them, what products did you buy? It's like one of each or two of each. So you've bought a lot of them. Now the question is, which are the right ones? How do I really kind of start leveraging what I have effectively? And in my view, at least, cyber has moved from an individual to a team sport. So you have now a collection of individuals that have to work together to defend against the attack. And how do they operate effectively as a team? And that's part of the challenge that they have within there.
And how does a cyber range help? I mean, that's what you do, right?
Yes.
You provide these cyber ranges, these mock networks.
Yep.
How does that help?
So one challenge is a cyber range similar to a physical range, which is an isolated, safe, and contained environment. There's just a number of things you cannot do in a production network. So in your real operational network, you can't do live destructive attacks. You don't have time for mistakes. You can't go in and say, hey, let me try out and see how this attack will deal with my operation. Because you're going to have a lot of users not going to be happy about that. So what we do is we kind of clone. We make a high fidelity replica of that enterprise environment in that safe and isolated but cyber environment. So within that, now you can actually put operators, you can put tools, you can put technologies, and put them under, say, disastrous or challenging conditions, and seeing how well they're going to behave. How well does the technology stand up? How well do the teams actually operate? And measure that, and start quantifying. Get your baseline, and start figuring out how to improve it in what areas.
And Jason, what are the design considerations when you're building something like that? It sounds like you need quite a lot of computing power.
Yeah, from an infrastructure perspective, really three major considerations. One being extreme efficiency. Most organizations don't have the budget to build a complete physical replica of their network. I mean, that could cost millions, tens of millions of dollars to build a physical replica. So in Lee's case, in SimSpace case, actually building an operationally realistic environment that's a clone of that network, but using technologies like container technologies, virtualization technologies hosted in a cloud, and using, for example, Tegile all-flash storage as the storage infrastructure underneath. And then using technologies like data reduction technologies, inline compression, inline deduplication, to really squeeze the duplication out of that environment and compress it down, make it very efficient. So that's one. Second would be performance at scale. These environments running large cyber exercises can be very, very demanding. Could be thousands, tens of thousands of red team, blue team kind of participants in these exercises. So the system has to perform. It has to perform at scale. So very important element. And then lastly would be data security. So this is an operationally realistic, essentially a blueprint of your entire network environment. So securing that, you would not want that to fall in the wrong hands. Right. So having that data encrypted and secured, very, very critical. Yeah.
So Lee, what is the biggest threat that organizations, the biggest cyber threat that organizations need to be prepared for today, and how are you helping them do that?
Fair. I think over the time we've seen a number of different threats evolutions going through. A lot of worrying about data exfiltration with intellectual property being lost, what's going on. Ransomware is big now across a number of organizations, besides the usual stuff that's going on. I think at least the large organizations that we're working with, they're worried about two-ish threats. One of them is data destructions. What happens if somebody comes in and starts taking me offline where I can no longer do business? So being offline for minutes, hours, days can be critical. The other one, which is even a little bit more sneaky, is the data manipulation. So as you get into some of the transaction systems, you start changing some of the data. So it's not obvious that you're offline, but it can have big ramifications, is some of those things that you worry about within there. So how do I ensure that I protect the data that I have, that it's not leaking out? How do I deal with the common threats that are going through and everybody right now and reducing that? But then there's also some of these nastier ones. And Sony was perhaps the first public example of what can happen when a company starts getting knocked off. So that's one of those threats.
I mean, that was a destructive attack.
That is a destructive.
They wiped the network. But the manipulation is even scarier, isn't it? I mean, how do you make sure that you protect the integrity of the data?
Well, that's the challenge. And that's where some of the security comes in from the technologies. What do they have in place? How do the operators know that somebody's coming in there, going through, manipulating? So the key for all of these is you have a lot of tech, which is great, but what you want to be able to do is shrink the time that the operators take to detect something bad is going on to reduce the window that they're in there. So the sooner you find it and you kind of get them out there and they're not in there for months, reduces the likelihood that they're in there making some of these manipulations. But that's part of the challenge that companies have to deal with.
So I'd like to put this question to both of you, the closing question. Lee, Jason, can each of you provide a real-world example of how your technology has helped an organization with its cybersecurity preparedness?
I can give you several, and maybe I'll rattle off a few, and then Jason, you can pop in with some as well. For the Department of Defense, they're standing up whole teams to be able to actually protect themselves. So 4,000 to 6,000 people, we're helping them be able to actually operate collectively as a team within there. Another one is large.
Is that the Cyber Mission Force you're
It
talking
is.
about there?
It is.
Okay, that's
So,
fascinating.
Yep.
So those guys are going to be using this kit, your kit?
The range environment, yes, they currently are. And figure out how, and learn and improve how they can actually operate effectively as a team. So they're on there now, and they're actually getting a lot better. The other one is large financial institutions, where they're migrating from tabletop exercises to hands-on keyboard, where they're actually defending against, take the Security Operations Center, put them in a SOC that models their environment, stand them up against a live attack. Perhaps in some cases we ran it for 30 plus hours, where the SOC shifts from the US to overseas and then back forward. So a couple of things that comes out of that one is, how prepared is the team, how good is the technology, and the handoffs between teams as they go through helps them identify. But some other things that came out of that one was they identified a number of things in the range when we kind of exposed what the attacker was doing that they used back into production to see how well that guy's going. And I'll give you one third example and then we'll move on. So the third one is, how do you actually decide what the right technology to buy is when you have all these vendors that are out there? So one example of a Fortune 500 company was they were trying to figure out endpoint protection. And there's a lot of endpoint protection companies out there. Yeah, right. So in this case, what we did is we provided them a generic financial institutions. We tailored to match some of the tools that they have, and then made 5 copies of it, 1 per vendor. And on each copy, you install the vendor within there. And now you can start comparing how they perform.
When you attack them.
When you attack them, measuring the detection, the impact, the overhead, the usability, and now you can start getting a bit more quantitative to help with that purchasing decision. Those are just some examples right there that are helping them out. Jason?
Well, I think certainly Lee mentioned the U.S. Department of Defense. It all kind of really started there. They were one of the first to really build these cyber range environments in scale. That kind of bled into the financial institutions, oil and gas, energy companies as well, to protect infrastructure, utility companies. We're even seeing now universities. I mean, you can imagine with IoT and all these connected devices out there, security is a big concern for universities, and how do you test, attack, defend? So certainly, I think all of those use cases, and Tegile would be a technology enabler underneath of each of those use cases. Yep.
Well, Jason, Lee, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Sean.
That was fascinating. And you can see more of us on our YouTube channel or on cyberscoop.com.